All right. My name is Thomas Besperl. I'm the resident writing consultant at the CBS Library. I'm here to help you, not just tonight, not just today. I'm here to help you in general manage your writing process and get the most out of your writing that you can, preferably in such a way that it helps you become better writers of research projects in the way you're doing it. So I'm not just telling you how to do it so that you get the final product. I'm trying to tell you how to do it in such a way that you will become a more productive, a more effective, and a happier writer, if I can, right? So if those are your goals, any of those three goals are yours, then hopefully you'll find something here. I should say today, the topic of today's talk is how to write the methods section. We're leading slowly on to, I think it's in 3 weeks' time, to a talk called How to Structure a Research Paper. And that's going to have a general overview of all the parts and how to put them together. But this talk is just focused on the methods section, just like last week's talks was focused on the theory section. Next week will be the analysis. And then I think we get on to structure, right? So but one thing to keep in mind as I talk about this is that I am not a methodologist as such. I like to call myself an infra-methodologist. So my interest is in the craft beneath the method, infra as in beneath, method as in how it's done, which is what I'll be talking about today. So I'm not really talking about things that specifically pertain to the way you're collecting or analyzing your data. I don't know anything in particular about how to do interviews or surveys or how to extract market data from our databases and that sort of thing. I do have some knowledge about how to do those things, but I don't know how to do your particular research projects. I don't know the standards in your disciplines. So it's really important to keep in mind that what I'm telling you is something a lot more general. It's a little bit like the inverse of meta theory. So I'm not talking about the theory above the theory of the theory, right? I'd be talking about I'm talking about the craft that underlies, or the craft that lies beneath the method, right? So these are basic craft skills, a kind of attitude you can have towards your work, a way of organizing, a way of approaching it, that many students have just found make their lives better, make them happier, more productive, and more effective as writers, right? That's the idea. So I hope you'll take it in that spirit. I always remind you, I hope you don't think you're gonna become better writers by the end of this evening. You are going to become better writers not by believing what I tell you tonight, but by doing as I say. And you'll have to do it repeatedly until you've built up some kind of training, some skills, and that you're in shape. So we're basically trying to get your methodology in shape, right? And I can't do that for you tonight. I can just give you some activities you can do, some ways of approaching the problem, right? Our organizing metaphor for these talks is this iceberg. And we always start with an iceberg because Hemingway said the dignity of the movement of an iceberg lies in only 1/8 of it being above water. You will hear this every time, every week. And dignity of movement is important. We're going to be talking about making sure that, in this case, the methods section has its requisite dignity. That is to say, presents itself to the reader as something that has more to offer under the surface. You don't want your methods section to seem like it's just superficial, right? You want your writing to come off as though it has something under the surface. And when we're working through this, what I did in the first talk was to say that the methods section is deliberately in the very middle of the iceberg. It is in many ways the center of your style. And I'm going to try to convince you of that today, that when you're trying to develop your voice in academic writing, a good place to go is your methods section, because you get to be yourself there in a very formal and particular and scholarly and academic way, but you get to be yourself, right? That's a really important thing to keep in mind. You get to basically just tell the truth, right? Which is not easy. We all know that sometimes, but it is a straightforward business. And of course, all of this stuff we have above the surface, the background section, the theory section, the analysis, the discussion, the introduction and conclusion. These are all things that we have separate talks to discuss. but they all indicate a basis underneath which. And for every section, we're going to talk about what's above the surface and how it relates to what's underneath the surface, and how to write it in such a way that the reader gets this impression that there is more. There's about 7/8 more, or there's about 8 times more. That's how you do the math. It's about 8 times more under the surface, right? So that's the thing that we're going to try to do today. You'll notice that the form that I'm going to be using is the same for all of these. But before I get to how we approach specifically the method section, I thought I would present to you a little exercise, a writing exercise that I've developed that I've never really had a chance to teach, to use, but that I would encourage you to try. If you do it really, really deliberately, it would take you 2.5 hours to do this exercise, right? And you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it half an hour at a time. You would be composing 5 paragraphs. So it's a little 5-paragraph essay that you would do. But what I would encourage you to do is to think about this as a story, right? So you're going to be writing a little story. Hemingway would say that if you're going to write a story, you have to have some experience to base it on. And so in order to get used to that, this is an exercise you can do. Pick a place that you know, a place you know, a place you find interesting, a place you find enriching to go to. Make sure it is not your secret place, right? This is not a place that you don't want anybody else to know about. It's a place that you think other people would find nice to visit, go visit. They would get something out of it. They might even be grateful to you if you explain to them where it is and what you can do there, right? So think about this place and make sure it's reasonably far away. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to get there. Now you want to make sure it's going to take about 5 minutes of your reader's attention to explain to them how to get there and why they should go, right? And then write 5 paragraphs, write a 5-paragraph essay, 1 paragraph at a time, spending 27 minutes on each paragraph. Take a 3-minute break and then either get on with your day or go on to the next paragraph. But really, really deliberately start the reader off somewhere where you know they can find. So it could be this building, for example, right? So you start them someplace where you say, just start at Keelan, right? And then say, go down to the metro. And then say, get on this train in this direction, right? Change at this station, so forth, right? Explain to them how to get to this place that you like. And make sure that if there's any places along the way where they might get lost, where they might take the wrong turn, get on the wrong train, right? At any point along that way, make sure that they know what the options are, and then how to recognize the right one, and then how to recognize after they've chosen the right one that they're now going in the right direction now, right? So if you did this part right, which was maybe a little bit difficult, then you're going to be seeing this next, right? And this will be the announcement that will be made in the train and so forth, right? As you get closer to the place that you want to indicate to them, there should be symptoms that they're getting closer. There should be indications that they're getting closer, right? Like now, things should start looking like this. And if it's in the summertime, the trees will be this color and so forth, right? So you'll be explaining how things should be looking now if you're doing it right. And then, of course, at the very end, you want to make sure you tell them how they know that they've gotten there, that they found the right place. What are some of the indications there that this is the right place? And then, of course, reward them by saying, and now you can jump in the water, right? So you lead them on some kind of trip, you guide them how to get there, and then you make sure that at the end they also get the reward for going there, right? That's they get out of it what you get out of it when you go there. All right, so imagine that, and imagine really doing it very deliberately and spending those 2.5 hours writing each paragraph, one introductory one where you kind of motivate them, you tell them a little bit about the place, right? And then 3 nice paragraphs where you give them 3 steps along the way, 3 ways of 3 paths, right? Or 3 sections, stages of the path to get there. And then at the very end, you conclude with this statement about what it should be like now and what you can do here. If you do that exercise, notice that you are completely the authority on this. You've chosen the place. right? You've chosen the place to start. You know what you're talking about. You value this place, so you understand the reasons to go there. And this is completely in your voice. This is totally your own experience that you're drawing on. And you are giving the reader helpful instructions about how to have your experience, right? You're guiding the reader to have your experience. And you've also given yourself a framework of sort of the volume of writing you're going to be doing, right? So you're going to spend about 5 minutes of your reader's attention by writing 5 paragraphs of at most 200 words each, right? That's about a minute each. So you've sort of said, I'm going to spend 5 minutes of your time, dear reader, to explain this to you. So also pick the place and the route, right? So you're picking the place, and the thing, the whole business that you're describing should be worth it, right? Like the reader shouldn't feel like, oh, you needed 1,000 words to tell me this. You could have just said, go to Google Maps, punch it in, and I can get there, right? So you need to find a place that is, you need to think of a place that's sophisticated enough as far as difficulty for getting there that it would require a nice little essay, right? So that the reader doesn't feel like their time has been wasted. So think about all of those things when you're doing this exercise, right? You need to pick the right place. You need to pick a complicated enough route to get there to justify the size of the assignment. And then you need to sit down, and actually you should also justify your own time. You're going to spend 2.5 hours writing this thing, right? Very deliberately, very carefully. You're not writing it in order to get anybody there yet. Maybe you can think of somebody that really would be grateful to get this document, and so you could send it to them. But you're doing it to become a better writer. You're doing it to find your voice. You're doing it to understand what it means to put words on the page that are instructions for somebody to do something or go somewhere or find something. And you're going to put those instructions down based on your experience from your own authority, right? If you think of that as the archetypical method statement, right? You just really think about that is the mood you want to be in. That's how you want to be writing when you're writing your method. Then you've got a good place to start. And if you give yourself that experience, not just the image of it, so not just the fantasy of writing that text, but actually write that text so you now know exactly what I'm talking about, then you have a standard to begin with. So I hope you consider that. It's just an exercise. It's 2.5 hours of your time. Consider doing it. Consider doing it even faster, right? Shorter, whatever, right? Some version of it that you find useful. But it's a really good exercise to try. And doing a good job of it and then giving it to somebody and seeing if they can find it, right? That's a great little test, right? Because these are actual instructions. Good. You all know that what I'm going to say next, I am going to tell you never to start on a blank page, and I'm going to show you how to avoid it. In our standard model of paragraph writing, we always distinguish one day from the next. We make a little separation, right? And then we say this is Thursday and this is Friday. We make a decision at the end of the day for what we're going to do tomorrow. You can check all that out in the How to Write video. This is going to be a problem, I see. Somebody has already fixed it. But you check all that out in the How to Write video. What we're going to do in these talks, and I'm going to move this just a wee bit. In these talks is not to make this a time structure, but we're going to take this under the surface and over the surface, and we're going to make that very explicit. What we're going to do is we're going to say for every section of our papers, we need to have a good sense of what basis are we writing it on. In Danish, I always say, "Hvad har du at have i?" Right? So you always have to have a good sense of when you're writing, what is it that gives you a basis for writing about these things? And then you need to have some purpose with which to write it. And you're going to distinguish each of the sections of your papers by reference to these two things, because these are going to be the things that are different, right? And today, because we're talking about method, I need to tie this together with some of the other sections. You'll notice that method is right in the middle, and it's trapped nicely between theory and the analysis. So we have the methods section in here, right in the middle. And understanding what the methods section is going to do, right, will really depend on understanding what the theory section and what the analysis is going to do. So I'm going to tell you very quickly about that. We've already done theory last week, so you can go back and look at that and get some more information there. I'll very quickly remind you of that. I'll then tie it together with the analysis and then show you how the method fits in, right? But as far as what basis we're writing them on, we already know that, right? So the theory is, of course, based on your review of the literature. So the theory that you present to your reader is going to be based on your reading of the scientific literature. And the analysis will be based on the data. Very important. Data, I don't know how this happened, but about 2 or 3 years ago, I started thinking data comes from the Greek, which it doesn't. It comes from Latin. It comes from the Latin for the given, right? So analysis is Latin for that which is given, things that are given to you. It's things you can take for granted in your analysis, basically, right? So when we're talking about method, we're going to talk about the process by which you generate data, right? And the method section is going to be based on your experience. And by that, I mean, in the method section, you get to tell the true story of what you did and why you did it to gather the basis for your entire analysis, right? To collect your data. You tell the true story of what you did and why you did it. You could say the true story of the way you did your research, and that's actually, again, it has a nice etymological connection because method comes from the Greek hodos, right? That is Greek, comes from the Greek hodos, and which just means way or path, right? So you're going to be telling the true story of the way you did things or the path you took towards the truth, right? That's the whole idea behind this method. And of course, that's also where my little exercise fits in, because that would be a description of a path one would take towards some place that one wants to find. Okay? So keep that in mind, that is what the method is. It is this path. Now, there are in general, two ways, and we've talked a little bit about this, two general ways of thinking about theory. One of them is as a system of expectations or presumptions that your reader has. So you're trying to get your reader to expect certain things. You're going to write expectations. You're going to set up a conceptual framework, and once you've told your reader this, the reader will say, oh, well, on the background of what you've told me, I'm going to expect this of your object. I will expect your analysis to show me layers if I'm going to do an organizational culture analysis. I'm going to expect you to show me a retrospective process if you're doing a sense-making analysis. I may expect you to do a journey if you're doing a marketing analysis, right? So there's lots of different metaphors, guiding metaphors, and they all cause us to expect things of the analysis, right? That's one way to do it. There is another way, and that is to shape the reader's curiosity. So you might either activate the reader's expectations using the literature or shape the reader's curiosity. And that may sound like the same thing, but we can easily see the difference when we think about what the analysis would do, depending on what we've done with the theory. If the theory has set up expectations, some of you might think the analysis should satisfy those expectations, should fulfill them, should live up to them, right? But of course, in science, it's perfectly fine to challenge the reader's expectations of the object with your analysis, right? That is a legitimate thing to do. In fact, it's a desirable thing to do. I sometimes say, in the analysis, you try to bring about the artful disappointment of the reader's expectations of the object, right? So it's and I will say more about this next week. But one way of putting the goal of the analysis is to bring about the disappointment of the reader's expectations of the object, which is to say, to teach the reader more than the reader already understood by reading the theory. Just like you learned more by going out and collecting the data and looking at it and doing your analysis than you learn from just reading your scientific literature, right? So you want to make sure that the reality in some sense disappoints the theory, right? Because it goes above it, it exceeds it, right? It teaches us something more. So it's disappointment in a very particular sense. I say disappointment for a reason that I will get back to in a second. If you have if you've stimulated the reader's curiosity, by contrast, right, then what you want to do in the analysis is to make sure you satisfy that curiosity, right? You've gotten the reader curious about what's going to happen in your analysis in particular parts of it. So you want to make sure that your goal here is one of satisfaction, right? So your purpose in writing your analysis will be to satisfy the curiosity that you activated, that you stimulated in your reader in the theory section. So notice that there is this, and we'll talk much more about this in 2 weeks in the structure talk, about that your project in the theory section and the analysis go together. You should think about them as two things that go together, right? And this is where it then gets very interesting, right? If you have something you want to do in the analysis, right, and it depends on what you've done in the theory, then the thing we have to ask ourselves, right, is what gives you the competence to either disappoint the reader or satisfy their curiosity, right? What is it? If the theme of your theory section is expectation, right? Then we have to ask, the theme of the method section is going to be your competence to either disappoint, challenge, or satisfy those expectations of that curiosity. So you're going to write some paragraphs in the method section that really signal your competence as a scholar, as a researcher, right? And there's then going to be naturally two different ways of doing this. Because we can analyze this competence in two directions. And they roughly, I mean, every time I present this, people will point out, this does really go together and is kind of the same thing, but it's roughly indicated to the expectation disappointment side or the curiosity satisfaction side. One of them is, I'm sure you've all had your expectations disappointed in life at some point, right? You've all had that wonderful experience of expecting something and then not getting it, right? Or getting the opposite even. That experience, of course, is one that we encourage you to go out and have. It's called learning, right? School of life, go do it. But we have a natural tendency when we meet disappointment. And that natural tendency is to question or reject the experience that is disappointing us. It's a kind of a hope, right? It's sort of like, maybe we're not really having this disappointing experience, right? Maybe something else is going on, right? Maybe the reality is different. And if the reality is different, I don't have to be disappointed, right? And of course, in science, we do this all the time because so we have beautiful theories. We've spent a long time learning them. They're useful to us in life. They get us around. So we have these theories. Then somebody comes along with an analysis that says your theory is wrong. Right? Broccoli will not make you healthier. Drinking 16 cups of coffee a day will not help you avoid diabetes. Right? Studies have shown, but new studies have shown something else. Right? So we get, in principle, disappointed. But then we say, aha, but there must be something wrong with your data. There must be something wrong with the study that shows this thing that disappoints the theory that I really like. I have a theory I really like. It's worked for me. Why should I trust your study? And that is the question that method is intended to answer. So before we get to the disappointment, usually, we'll talk about ordering this later as well, we've set up these expectations. We're going to disappoint them. So I have to, as a writer, as a researcher, I have to win your trust as a reader in my data. Right? I have to show you why you should trust my data, because then when you get to the analysis, you will actually feel the relevant disappointment. You will learn the lesson that I'm trying to teach you in my analysis. Right? I'm not going to reject it. right? So basically, we're anticipating that skepticism, that natural skepticism of the reader. It's actually a really good word to join all of this together. Everybody's got a little bit of skepticism, right? It's healthy. We don't believe everything we're told just because we're told it. We've got that skepticism that kind of checks that formation of belief. And what you want to do in the methods section is address that skepticism, take it seriously, and tell the reader why they should trust you anyway. Right? How does that work with curiosity? Well, you could say it's kind of the same. Oh, yeah. So what are we going to do, to win the reader's trust? We are going to invoke our common set of standards. And this is where it gets to be a little more than just experience, right? Because the way we know what the standards are in our discipline, what the methodological standards are that we try to live up to, is of course by looking back to the same literature that also has method section that tells us what properly impressive sample size is, right? What sorts of robustness checks should we be doing, right? Do we need to use intercoders in order to have, or do we need to use other coders in order to establish intercoder reliability if we're doing that kind of analysis, right? So there's lots of different methods that methodological standards that you will be using. And what you want to make sure is that you're aware of them. And then you want to tell the reader, well, I did these things the way that we all think is the right way to do this. And so that's that side of it. The other option is curiosity and satisfaction. It works a little bit differently. There's still an interesting tension there, right? So we set up in the mind of the reader a curiosity about where is this going to go? What are you going to show? All right, we sort of put in holes, as it were, in the reader's mind, and we promise that we're going to fill in those holes for the reader. And then we have to, when we're writing the analysis, we have to make sure the reader doesn't think the thing that makes it not satisfying. And it's actually, this works even when you're reading fiction. Sometimes a book of fiction is not satisfying if you get the sense that the writer is just making it up. Now, of course, in fiction, the writer is just making it up, right? And yet there's an art to making things so plausible that it doesn't feel like it's made up, right? It feels like these things could actually happen. So it all makes sense what's happening. Our curiosity is satisfied because we're not just being told a bunch of things that happened, that yes, they fill in the holes, they also make sense. So there's that sense of satisfaction. And a good writer gets that, of course, in their craft. You don't have to develop that craft necessarily. You can work on it. You don't have to develop as a scholar, because you have something that a novelist doesn't have. You have authority, right? And what you do as a scholar, as a researcher, is in the method section, you tell the reader how you came to know the things that you know, right? How did you get the relevant input, the relevant data, right? So that when you say, my interview subject said this, or I observed them do this or that, the reader believes you, right? The reader takes your word for it because you have the authority to declare these things, right? So you're trying to establish your authority as an author of the story that will be satisfying. And that's something that a novelist has to do page for page right from the beginning, because there's no method statement at the beginning of a novel, right? But in a research paper, you actually have that opportunity to say, look, dear reader, this may not be the greatest literature you've ever read, right? But I am an authority on the subject, right? So I'm not trying to wow you with my style, but you have to listen to me because I talked to these people for this long. I observed these people in this organization. I extracted this data from this database, right? So I am an authority. That's what you're trying to do. And this raises an interesting thing that I've been getting into lately. It's sort of getting a little bit of new life. I mean, it's not a super new idea, but a lot of people are talking about it these days. Something called positionality. And this is something that, especially if you're doing ethnographic research or human geography or this kind of thing, like if you are qualitative, many of the qualitative disciplines will get you to think about your positionality. And it has a little bit to do with a lot of this diversity and inclusion stuff that we talk a lot about these days, good governance principles and so forth, but this is just for researchers, where you think about your power relationship to the people you're studying. And of course, you have to think about that as a representative of an academic institution. You're going to go out and so-called objectify them, right? You're going to turn them into objects for research. That is an exercise of power, right? They, on the other hand, are probably going to hire you at some point in the future. So they got a bit of power over you as well, right? This is a two-way street. They have some influence on what you're going to say about them. And so reflecting on that positionality, on the power dynamic, on the ethical relationship that you have with your object is often something, especially like I say in qualitative ethnographic work, that is now becoming part of a methodological reflection. And in fact, I think some of you will immediately correct me and say, what do you mean is now becoming? Hasn't it been like this for a long time? And it has. You can trace this back even to the 1800s, various reflections about how anthropologists should be studying their objects, right? I hope that makes sense. Like that's something to consider. How are you going to establish your authority and your positionality with respect to your object so that your reader will find your analysis satisfying of their curiosity, versus how are you going to get the reader to trust your data by living up to their standards, right? So that the expectations that you're going to challenge will actually be challenged, and the reader won't just reject your data, right? Won't just reject your analysis. Really two basic approaches. And of course, it can get a lot more complicated than that, but I don't think there's really any need to get too into too many of the weeds on that. Are there any questions about this so far? Okay, so the important thing to keep in mind is, like I said at the beginning, that I don't have any particular expertise in your methodologies, right? And when you're looking at this kind of diagram and you're trying to structure your methodology section, just remember, this is at the most abstract level, right? I have to decide what the literatures I'm using. I have to decide what experiences I'm drawing on, and I have to decide what my data set is. What you want to make sure is that you fill this in with labels that are relevant to you. So maybe a list of the key theorists that you're using, right? And a list of the articles you're citing. A list of the experiences you had collecting your data, right? A description, just a nice summary of the things you've actually done. What are the actual experiences that you had? Keep in mind that experience has both the component of making a decision, reasoning through what to do, and then carrying it out. Right? So you're going to say, well, I chose these interview subjects. I chose this company to study, and I had my reasons for that. So I can describe for the reader my decision process for that. And then once I made that decision, I then actually called up those interview subjects. I conducted those interviews. I went into a particular kind of room with them. I sat there for a definite amount of minutes, and all of those things can be explained, right? So doing 27 semi-structured interviews, if you've done that many, I don't know if you have to, right? But if you've done that many, is probably 27 hours of experience. And those 27 hours probably had some things in common, hopefully. Maybe what they had in common was your interview guide. Maybe they didn't have the setting in common. It wasn't all of them in the same conference room. Maybe you interviewed each of them in their respective offices, which might be methodologically relevant. Maybe 3 of them you couldn't interview in person, but they offered to do it on the phone or over Zoom. So you have to make a note of that, right? And these are all just facts in the story that you're going to present. You're going to say, this is how I did these interviews. You're going to tell these stories. Space permitting, you decide how many details you pick. So keep in mind that this isn't just literature experience data. These are actual concrete facts that you can report. Similarly, the data set is actually the tapes and then the transcriptions of those interviews, if you're doing interviews, right? Or your field notes, right? The data set you extracted from the Bloomberg terminals. Right, so you can describe the data. And that's an important step in the craft of doing research. Likewise, when you get over here, I think I would go further than saying that I've made a choice between curiosity and expectation. I'm going with expectation, right? So this is the purpose I've chosen. Itemize those expectations. What is it that you imagine your reader will be expecting of your object? And that gets very detailed, goes right down to your hypotheses, right? So you have use the theory to build a compelling null hypothesis. From that, you generate some testable hypotheses. And now we're right up to method, right? Because as soon as you get to the point where you have a hypothesis that can be tested, you've already really presupposed some kind of data that would be a legitimate test of that hypothesis, right? So be specific. What do you, not just I'm trying to get the reader to expect, tell yourself, what am I trying to get the reader to expect? And that'll help guide your theory. Likewise, I'm not just trying to disappoint my reader. These are the actual conclusions that I've reached in my analysis that challenge my reader's expectations, right? So I'm going to list them as statements based on my data about the object that I've studied. And then when we get to this part, if you've decided I'm going to win my reader's trust by invoking our standards, you've got two things to do there, right? Two obvious things to do. One is to remind the reader what are the standards in our discipline. So this is where you can even go to the methods handbooks or the methods sections of the papers in your literature review. Find out what are our standards, remind the reader these are our standards, and that's why my sample looks like this. These are the things I did to make sure it looks that way. Right? Always be in dialogue with your reader in that way. And the same thing goes for this part. Make clear to yourself what you're trying to get the reader curious about, which facts in your analysis are the satisfaction of that curiosity. Now you've got a nice way of structuring those two sections, and then say, who am I to tell this story, right? What gives me the authority to tell this story? What is my position in this field, right? How am I positioned in this field to tell this story with some credibility and authority? Right? And then itemize those relationships, those facts, the things you've done to gain that position of authority. One last thing I want to get to. But I think I'll take these three things. There's different kind of concepts from methodology that we often kind of use when we're talking about methodology. One of them is things like scope and validity and reliability, these sorts of terms, and they will be used differently in your disciplines. Just kind of keep that in mind. What is the scope that you're setting for your research, right? What is it that gives your data validity relative to your research question? Right? Specify all those things in your method. And then one thing that comes up very often when we talk about the discussion section, and I want to try to anticipate it by talking already about it now, is do we talk about the limitations of our study in the discussion section or in the methodology section? And this is something that's very, very useful to talk to your supervisors about, because different disciplines have different traditions for this. Some people will say, you do your theory, you do your method, you do your analysis, and then in the discussion section, you say, well, these results there are some limitations, and so you specify those in the discussion. A more traditional, a more classical approach would be to tell the reader what the limitations of your research are already in the methods section. So as part of the methods description, you tell the reader what the limitations of your method are. And then, of course, you stay within those limits in your analysis and in your conclusion so that you don't have to discuss, how this analysis runs into its limits after the reader knows what it is. But it is something that's worth discussing with your teachers and supervisors, what we prefer in our discipline. Do we prefer that they come at the end in the discussion, or do they come in the method section? If you want a really good, in my opinion, a really good example of a methods description that is very, very old, so you can't really use it for anything, it doesn't live up to your standards at all, but stylistically, it's just really, really interesting to read. Go to the library, find Erving Goffman's book, Asylums. It is a book. It's generally considered a coherent work, but it is really 4 essays that talk about how total institutions work. So mental asylums, prisons, and so forth. It talks about how institutions like that work. And it is based on his couple of years of observation in a mental hospital in Washington, D.C. And the preface to that book is the thing I want to draw your attention to. It's about 3.5 pages, I think. It's not very long. And by the end of it, you just trust this guy. He just tells you kind of who he is and what he's been doing for the last few years. Under what conditions he's been collecting his data and his observations. He tells you a little bit about himself. And by the end of it, you say, yeah, I'll read 4 essays by you about how institutions like this work, right? Because you not only have, if everything you say is true, not only have you done the work, right, that puts you in a position to talk about these institutions, but you seem self-aware, right? You are aware of your limitations as an observer, right? And so you are somebody I trust. You seem not only like an authority, you also seem like a trustworthy kind of character. And that's what you want to spend those, whatever it's going to be, 2 or 3 or 5 pages in your projects, establishing, is this sense of yourself as a thinker, as a scholar, somebody that can actually collect data and analyze it in a way that can teach us something. That's my advice to you, is to approach it in that way. And then let's look back to that exercise I started with. You don't even have to do that exercise now, because now you can just sit down and write your methods section, right? Think about how you collected your data. Think about or how you're going to collect your data. Write a paragraph that introduces that in general. Say, this study is based on semi-structured interviews. Explain a little bit about what's good about semi-structured interviews for describing the kinds of phenomena you're interested in, right? And then pick 3 or 4 things. You can write a paragraph about each, about how you did this well. Right? You didn't just do semi-structured interviews, you did them in a specific way. And that specific way of doing it, those steps you took, the protocol you followed, produces good, interesting, valid data that we can use in a research project like this. That's the goal, right? So you can either write a little story first just to see how it feels to speak like you know what you're talking about, or you can assume you already know what you're talking about with your method, and you know how to do interviews, and you know how to decide who to talk to and so forth. And so you're going to tell that story right away, or do both. Right? Good. I think that is what I wanted to say. I think that kind of worked. What we'll do is we'll take a 5-minute break, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, either arising from this talk or from any of the other talks. Yeah, so let's say we'll start at 10 past.